Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just letting the last few folks pop in and get their audio connected before we get started. We appreciate you guys all joining us today and our great partners from Right to Play. All right. So as always, this session is being recorded. So if you're uncomfortable having your face shown on a recording that will be posted to a website, then please do shut off your video. We would love to see your faces. We would love to see your cats and your pets and your kids if they happen to come into the frame. That's all great news. And please keep yourself on mute. There'll be a chance for questions in the back end. So if you have anything that you need, just pop it in the chat and myself or one of the other moderators will address your question or try to help you with any of the IT needs that you have. So first and foremost, I wanted to recognize that our work and the work of many of our partners and grantees takes place on traditional Indigenous territory on what is now called Ontario. And I want to express gratitude and honor to all the original peoples, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on these lands since time immemorial. I also want to acknowledge that MLSE Foundation's head office and a significant part of our community investment is located on traditional territory and has been governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt for 1,000 years, and in recent times by the Williams Treaty and Treaty 13. And as a settler organization, we recognize the contributions and importance of Indigenous people, and this is very connected to our commitment to the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I also want to acknowledge, because I think that it would be really tone deaf not to, that over the past week, we have seen the impact of historical inequity, violence, and inaction on the Black community. Racist and oppressive systems that are in place have made people feel hurt, angry, and frustrated. As an organization and throughout the world, we've been having some tough, uncomfortable conversations this week, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And the fact that showing up and being present is a lot harder for some folks every single day, not just in the last couple of days. So as an organization, we're going to continue to recognize the privilege that we have. We're going to continue to listen and learn and continue to bring topical, relevant resources to the space. We're committed to doing that, and we're really happy that you showed up today to spend your time with us. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two folks from Right to Play who have also graciously agreed to give us some of their precious time. Emily Gibson's the program director for Right to Play's Promoting Life Skills in Aboriginal Youth program. She's worked and volunteered in community development and environmental sustainability sectors for 10+ years. Emily's worked with Right to Play for the past 8 years, where she specializes in mental wellness, grief, and child safeguarding programming. Mallory's the acting country director for Right to Play's Play program. She has over 10 years of experience working internationally and across Canada, designing and implementing community-based and youth leadership programs. Prior to joining Right to Play, she received her master's degree in social work at the University of Toronto, specializing in social justice and community development. So to start with, I'm just going to ask Brian to pop up the pre-poll, and I'm going to throw it over to Mallory and Emily to take us through their presentation. Over to you, ladies.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, I'm actually going to shuffle the poll out of me looking at my own face. Thank you, folks. It's really lovely to be in the space with everybody, and also thank you to MLSE Foundation for the invitation and just for convening these spaces. I think we don't get our usual networks or access to networks and learning opportunities at these times, and so this is a really lovely way to continue to create space for us to learn and grow together, ask each other questions, share resources and knowledge, as we're all kind of, I feel like, troubleshooting on the go and responding to ever-changing, ever-evolving needs. I am going to share my screen so that we have a bit of a presentation, but it's really great to see a bit of the pre-poll happening. Right now it's looking like heavily people are somewhat confident, which is really good to learn, and thank you all for submitting into that pre-poll. I'll share my screen. I don't use Zoom, so just be gentle with me on my technology savviness. I'll do there we go. Share. And now I've got to get to the presentation. So is that showing for you guys? Is that showing, it's showing right? Okay, beautiful. Win number one for the day. So Em and I will be sharing the presentation back and forth, but I'll kick us off. I wanted to first start with a few introductions. I forgot that we had provided Kendra our mini bio, so I won't actually dive into too much about myself. I'll let Em do an introduction. She also is calling in not from Ontario, so she's going to do a land acknowledgement from where she's calling in from. But I first just wanted to say we got a lot of feedback around what people are looking for and what people would like to learn and experience in this training, and we want to be really honest and set the space in terms of who we are not, and what we can offer to this space, and maybe where our boundaries are in terms of specifics that we can't necessarily provide full clarity on. So Em and I are both child and youth programmers. We've done it for a really long time. We've put into practice many variations across many different organizations, child safeguarding policies, and have implemented them. We're also trainers. We work in a kind of the trainer model at Right to Play. So we work with training a lot of frontline youth workers around child and youth program delivery, including child safeguarding practices. And we're staff of an organization that's International Child Safeguarding Organization. So Right to Play does have fairly strong or robust child safeguarding policies. The caveat, we are not legislation or privacy experts. We're not going to feign to be lawyers. We won't be able to answer all legal questions in that regards, but we'll do our best to give you any guidance or recommendations that we do have. And Em, I'll toss it to you.
Thanks, Mal. Hi, folks. So excited to be joining this forum today from the beautiful, unceded, traditional, and ancestral lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations here in Vancouver. Really excited to see so many folks on the call from so many different organizations, and can't wait for the breakout groups to dive into our discussion a bit more.
So in way of introductions, because I feel like a lot of us are new to this space, we're not going to go deeply into the program that we work for, but we did want to give you a quick high-level 2-minute overview of the PLAY program, which is the Promoting Life Skills in Aboriginal Youth program that Right to Play implements across Canada. We'll also do an overview of our, in general, child safeguarding policy. So what is that overarching policy? And we'll also review, really for the sake of today, and what the ask was focusing on, our digital communication guidelines. So this is kind of how we've reconfigured and thought about child safeguarding in virtual or remote programming. And then we thought it would be really applicable and hopefully helpful to have breakout discussions for you to think about, consider what might work or not work in terms of your programs, the spaces that you're delivering in, the youth or program participants that you're working with. And from there, we'll go into a bit of a Q&A. As I said, we're not going to dive into the laws and legislations around specific things, also particularly noting in Canada, different provinces have different legislation. So we'll try to highlight some pieces in Ontario that we think are really relevant. And I similarly just wanted to front that, you know, talking about child welfare, child protection, child safeguarding is also a really loaded topic. We know that the systems of child welfare have been particularly harmful against Black and Indigenous families across Canada, and continue to be. And so this is loaded. It's a loaded topic. It's a loaded consideration. At Right to Play, we fully recognize that, and that sometimes we function and work within systems that we maybe personally disagree or agree with. And at the end of the day, our kind of guiding light at Right to Play is that we really want to make sure that we're conscious of creating communities of support and safety for young people to access. And we see youth workers and child and youth workers as really critical people to being that person or to creating those spaces for young people. And so we always want people to feel equipped and comfortable and confident to support young people in whatever things that they're experiencing to whatever capacity we have. So today we will really go over some of our guidelines, policies, considerations, and things that might be applicable for you in the places and spaces that you work in. So at Right to Play, many people might know it as an international organization, but we've actually been working in Canada in partnership with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities for the past 10 years. We're actually in our 10-year anniversary as a program. And we're all about play-based learning. So with the Promoting Life Skills in Aboriginal Youth program, we work to support Indigenous children and youth to make healthy choices, develop healthy relationships, be motivated lifelong learners, and really put into practice their leadership skills. And we partner with over 85 different Indigenous communities and organizations across the country. And like I was saying a little bit earlier, we're kind of a train the trainer program. So in the partnerships that we have with Indigenous communities, the local organization hires a youth worker called a community mentor who delivers frontline child and youth programming in the locale and setting that they're based in. And we do some salary sharing and program cost sharing. And then we provide a lot of training, resources, and coaching support throughout the year. And then of course, children and youth get to participate in and lead programs that build connections within the community and across their peers. So as I imagine many of you have experienced during COVID, these frontline community mentors have put in a tremendous amount of work to reconfigure what those programs look like, to make sure that they are continuing to engage and support young people, as we know that well-being and mental health are often at risk in and throughout a pandemic, and people want to make sure that young people are being supported and have access to opportunities and learning. So programs across these 85 partners look very different, but many of the community mentors are using things like Facebook or Instagram or Zoom, as long as the young people have internet access and device access. And so we've been working to make sure that they feel supported around how to set up those spaces safely. What are some different considerations or concerns that people might have as they've taken what was an in-person program into an online format? How do they still make it educational and engaging? But for the sake of today, we'll really talk to what are some of the new or different risks around child safeguarding that people might be dealing with, and how can we be proactive in terms of mitigating for that while maintaining quality of programming.
So Right to Play, as an international child safeguarding organization, has a child safeguarding policy that all staff members, volunteers, consultants, external facilitators who work with Right to Play and interact with kids sign on to. And it's a rather robust policy. One of the main proponents of the policy is our duty to report. So in Canada, in each province, we have a legal duty to report as governed by different acts, usually something like the Child and Youth Family Act. And so for Right to Play, we institute a duty to report disclosed or suspected abuse, whether that be physical, emotional, or sexual, and neglect towards a person under the age of 18. And we use 18 years old because it is the definition of a child through the UN. Although I do know that different provinces, for example, Ontario, your duty to report is 16 years, under 16 years old. However, our standard is a minimum of 18 years old. And something really important here that we do mention is that it can be suspected abuse or neglect, or it can be disclosed. And when you do become aware of a disclosed abuse or suspected abuse, then there are 3 different authorities that you can report to, whether that be hospital or a medical facility, police, or your local child and family services. So in addition to outlining what our duty to report is, we also talk about a few other practices that are really important for keeping kids safe. So we want to avoid one-on-one contact with a child. We've also set up boundaries and expectations around photo and media consent when taking a picture of a young person, if we want to share that out, you know, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in that situation. We also have a internal system for reporting abuse or neglect, whether or not the abuse or neglect is the accused perpetrator would be a right to play staff member, or if it's a non-right to play staff member, we have internal processes for how to address those situations immediately. And we also really prioritize training our staff. So each year, staff are trained and retrained on child safeguarding. And we've found that these trainings are usually super participatory, and we try to focus a lot on anonymous situations that have come up in the past that have been challenging to navigate. So there's always tends to be quite a fruitful conversation around how to ensure to the highest level that we can keep kids safe in our program. And then we've also identified some staff time for child safeguarding. So each country program in Right to Play has identified a staff member who's the national child safeguarding lead, and who can be the point person for questions around child safeguarding, ensure appropriate training, as well as are able to navigate reports of abuse and neglect that come up. I will also say that within Canada, our Canadian programs, that we also do report suicidal ideation, harm to self and harm to others, as that's a serious situation that we're faced with quite often. So we also ensure that those situations receive as much attention as abuse and neglect. Just before we change the slide, Right to Play does host our child safeguarding policy online. So folks are more than welcome to take a look at it. And it's especially might be helpful if you're crafting your own child safeguarding policy to have one as a bit of a jumping off point. So feel free to check that out online. Also has some great templates for consent forms and things like that in it as well. So as Mallory said, when we were faced with the COVID pandemic, a lot of programming started to transition to virtual and online spaces, as I'm sure most of your programs have as well. And we know that in an online context, we need to be particularly cautious related to child safeguarding because, through digital communications, we can have, misinterpretation of intentions. There can be blurred boundaries. We can increase the opportunity for being one-on-one with a child. There's more opportunities for cyberbullying. And certainly folks have probably seen in the news that there are online predators out there, and there's certainly been an increase of that activity during the pandemic. So as Mal said, we really wanted to ensure that the youth workers we were working with felt like they had the tools and knowledge to be able to keep kids safe as much as possible. So we devised digital communication guidelines that folks use in addition to, which is to complement our existing child safeguarding policy. And we did a lot of research into these guidelines and looked at other child serving organizations in Canada and outside Canada too, to understand what other folks found as the best practice. I saw a lot of folks from Boys and Girls Club on this call, and we definitely checked out your policy. And as well as we really based this off of YMCA's policy as well. So it was quite a collaborative effort trying to pull from what other folks have been finding is really helpful. So this slide has a bit of a small snapshot of some of the guidelines in our policy. We really tried to lay out sort of acceptable and unacceptable behavior, so it was clear what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate. And just to clarify, when we say digital communications, I'm talking about, you know, Facebook, Instagram, social media, online platforms, texting, emails, all that sort of communication here. And we suggested that all these practices take place when our youth workers are interacting with children and youth under the age of 18. So for example, in terms of email communication, in order to not communicate directly one-on-one with a child, it's encouraged that emails go through parents or guardians. Emails have maybe your supervisor on board, or sorry, on the email as well. It only talks about program-related matters, and that everyone is sending these from a work account. That was definitely, you'll see that as a reoccurring theme, having a designated work account for email and your social media platforms. In terms of online and social media, some of the acceptable behavior that we listed was, again, a work account, ensuring that participants meet a minimum age requirement for the application. So for example, Facebook and Instagram, I believe, have a minimum age limit of 13. If you are setting up, say like a private Facebook group, we want to have 2 adult staff who are administrators. This is because we want to avoid any cyberbullying and any inappropriate online behavior. We want to have as many eyes on that form as possible. As well as it's always advantageous to have another adult or staff member on these groups with you to see, you know, what you're posting. And then, as I mentioned, monitoring for inappropriate behavior. So then in terms of not acceptable in a social media or online forum, youth workers aren't allowed to follow or friend children on their personal accounts. What we have said though is for, you know, individuals who have familial connections, they have, you know, nieces or nephews on their personal accounts, that if they are familiar, that's okay. That we've just asked that they're not communicating about work matters through their personal account with those young people. But at Right to Play, our child safeguarding policy and our code of conduct policy applies to our professional and our personal lives. And so if a youth worker or if one of our staff members, if it was ever shared with us that they were acting in a way contrary to how those policies outline us to act, and they had young people on their account, then we'd certainly have to follow up with that from an HR perspective there. We've also asked our youth workers to avoid from commenting on a child's personal approach. And we're also asked folks to ensure that you always get your parent and guardian consent to be communicating with a young person and not to do so without that consent. In terms of some guidelines for phone calls and texts, the question definitely arose that sometimes our community mentors wanted to call and have a one-on-one check-in with their program participant. And so to navigate that, some of the things that were suggested was having a parent on the line, maybe having the phone on speaker and, you know, a parent or guardian hearing the conversation, maybe joining forces with another or working with another youth worker and having 2 youth workers and the youth on the line, calling 2 youth at once. So just really trying to maintain the principle of not being one-on-one or alone in a virtual space with a young person. I think we're good to go to the other side. So those are a few examples of the guidelines that we came up with. In terms of what that looks like in real life, we have a bit of an example here from one of our partners, Araland First Nation in Ontario. So they started hosting nightly Instagram Live program streaming. And in order to be able to make sure that they're keeping kids and themselves the safest, they've laid out a few different things. So they got consent from parents and guardians to communicate with children through Instagram. They invited their supervisor as an additional moderator in these live program streams. Their Instagram account is program specific. It's also private, and it approves, they approve who joins. They've also, I imagine most of you have a code of conduct or a group contract for how folks should be treating each other in your program. So they've also posted that online. They only accept followers who can access the app. And they also have made a concerted effort to do a bit of education around how young people can be cyber safe. You know, we have such great relationships with the young people that we work with that it's a really great avenue for us to reinforce those opportunities for how they can be safe online. And there are just so many great resources available online that you can do with young people in your program around that.
Great. So we thought it might be helpful, and thanks for going over those, Em, to have a bit of a breakout discussion before we come back to maybe any full group questions, considerations, or reflections. But hopefully the breakout discussion will help you kind of chew on, reflect on, and talk with some of your peers around what is or is not applicable to you and your program. So some of the guiding questions that I'll offer up to the breakout. What is something that maybe you're currently doing in terms of practicing safeguarding in virtual programs? What is something that you would like to do to improve safeguarding practices? And we know that people, resources, capacity are always a challenge and a limitation, especially in nonprofit and social service sector area. So are there any barriers that you're kind of recognizing that might be difficult to facilitate some of these things, and what are those barriers? It might be a great space to talk through some of that and troubleshoot with some of your peers while having that conversation. So those are the 3 guiding light breakout questions. Feel free if the conversation jumps off of those and goes in a different direction. We welcome that, and we'll maybe do breakouts for about 10 minutes, if that's okay, Kendra, and then we can come back and do a bit of a full group debrief, share back, anything like that.
Yeah, no problem. So what's going to happen now, folks, is that you'll see a prompt on your screen that asks you to click it to be assigned to a breakout room. Just click that, it'll automatically take you to the room that you've been assigned, and you can start having that discussion. So bear with us for 3 seconds. So you should be going now. Hey there, I think we're just gonna wait for other folks to click the button, and then we should be good. Okay. Hi, folks. Just hold tight while we wait for everyone else to join us back. Okay,
People made it back.
I think so.
Great. Well, I know I had a group that had really engaging conversation and talking through. We started talking about platforms and sharing successes and challenges or trial and erroring around different platforms, which I'm seeing some heads nodding. So maybe other groups started having those conversations too. But I wanted to open it up to hear if there was any major reflections or kind of conversations that people wanted to share back with the group, or any other questions or commentary they had as they've been navigating this topic.
So maybe what we'll do, Mel, is if you want to speak, just pop a little message in the chat and I can unmute you, and so that we're not all talking at once.
Great, thanks, Kendra. And even if it's questions that you want to ask the group, we're happy to have questions directed at the group, or if they're directed to Right to Play. Brennan.
Yeah, I just have a question. So with our program, you know, we have a lot of safeguarding in place. Like, we share our calendars so that everyone knows where we are at all times. You know, we never have any less than 2 staff facilitating our program and whatnot. So one of the slides talked about sending text messages and speaking on the phone. So I know with our program, if one of the youth doesn't show up, we usually give them a phone call or send them a text message. So obviously it's kind of hard to facilitate like having a supervisor involved, or you know, sometimes it's the youth's own cell phone and things like that. So I was just wondering if you had some ideas to sort of navigate around any challenges with phone communication with the youth.
Em, are you going to your mic, or? Yeah, there you go.
I was going for it, but you go for it, Mel.
No, you go ahead. I can jump in afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question, Brennan. I feel like we've had that quite a few times as well. You know, we don't have a perfect answer. I think one of the things, as I say, that people navigated this situation with the phone call is it would be more of a conference call. So they would have, you know, one other youth on the line, or another youth, a colleague if possible, to call and check in with that group. I also know, I don't know if you feel like it would be appropriate to have, you know, do that check-in with that youth in a group page, if you have like, you know, a WhatsApp group with all your program participants or something on it. Or when you text them, if you can even, you know, include your supervisor just as a bit supervisory, just as another adult in the group chat. It's definitely not always possible, but in all situations, in a lot of our programs, our youth workers work in really small remote communities. And so they do a lot of care package drop-offs, whether that's food or activities. So they're also able to go and check in and say hi on the family all at once as well.
I lost Brennan, where you were. Oh, there was some movement. Does that help to give some tips, or does anybody else on the call also maybe have any other? Or Brendan, did you have a follow-up?
No, I think that's good. You know, obviously I'm taking notes and stuff like that, so I'm going to bring it to the team, and then, you know, I can suggest some of those things, and then we can brainstorm some ideas as well. Because I think from what the PowerPoint slide shows, that was like one of the things that stuck out for our program.
Yeah, I think the biggest solution that I've heard is people just trying to keep like a WhatsApp group, and then even if you're like adding a specific kid, like, hey, George, like, are you joining us? Then at least it's still visible to many people, and so you're not as worried about the one-on-one. But yeah, that's a really great question. I know some of these things, they definitely are, it's like layers of process and steps that make our lives more complicated, to say the least. But yeah, that's a great question.
I've also heard that some folks have been recording their calls. So if you're not having super sensitive calls around confidentiality with youth, and you can't get in a setting that you're in a group, recording those sessions can sometimes act as a way to child safeguard.
One thing that we've tried is using a platform that is based off of like an email address, and to kind of have that extra layer assigned, rather than youth using their personal emails, use an organizational one. And because of that, it might be one-on-one conversations, but there is that layer of everything is still on the organization's domain. So like for each of our youth, we hand out like a name at healthoutloud.org, and they have a Skype chat or a group chat or something like that. So that way there's a little bit, it's one-on-one and it's still personal, but it's mixed.
And I think Mary from the City of Toronto also said that if you're calling from home and after you've identified who you are, putting the call on speaker so that the youth parents or guardians or whomever else is there can hear in the background could be a good solution as well.
That's a great idea. Yeah, thank you all. I love the creative. I feel like we're going to take some of these back as tips for people to try.
And I think Indica had a question, so I'm just going to unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, this is Indica from Visions of Science. For those of you that don't know, we work with low-income marginalized youth around the GTA in Toronto. And we work with two kind of separate age groups. We work with children that are ages 8 to 13, and then children that are ages 13 to 18 in our youth program. So a lot of what's coming up in this meeting today, I can see being directly applicable to our child group. However, at Visions, we really stress on, like, we really place an emphasis on mentorship, community building, representative mentorship, just kind of being a safe space for them to go to no matter what day it is, what time of day it is. And so that's kind of become the norm in how at least I communicate with the youth. If they message me at 10:30 with a question, at 10:30 p.m. I will answer, and it'll be a one-on-one text. And that's kind of the norm. And now in having these conversations, I realize it's kind of problematic, but I'm just wondering, how can we balance this relationship building and community building that we really prioritize versus safeguarding? Another thing is these youth that we work with, getting them information in an accessible way, considering the communities that we work with, is also very important to us. So we do use Instagram a lot, and emails aren't necessarily the best way to get through to them. Calling them, texting them is a better way to get through to them. So I'm just curious to hear on your thoughts of balancing mentorship versus safeguarding.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in full front loading, our program is not, like, we're not necessarily doing one-on-one mentorship. So we're definitely speaking from, and our guidelines come from, a more group oriented or group work specific type of program. But there was actually someone on my call, I want to say if her name was Aisha, but I could be wrong, who works at House of Dixon, who was talking about how they used Instagram. I don't know if she's still on the call. But she had some great, if she is, feel free to jump. Oh yeah, Alicia, there you are. I feel like you had some great tips that might help, because it seems like you do a lot of engagement through Instagram.
Hey everyone. Yeah, we use Instagram because it's just been the thing that has worked for us. It's definitely an easy way for us to get in contact with our youth. Just because at the time we started the Instagram because a lot of youth have access to a tablet or a cell phone that might not have it might not have data, but if they find Wi-Fi, they can always get in contact with us. And it just happened to be the easiest way. And that's kind of how we got the Instagram, because they didn't have access to give us a phone call or check in right away. It was definitely easier to contact them through social media. But our account is private, and all the youth on our chat we know. I mean, on our Instagram we know them, so we kind of definitely will look into somebody. If we don't know them, we'll send a message or find out who they are. We can definitely find out who they are based on their friends list. If they have no one in common with us, I'm not really sure why, and we don't know you, how would we know, like, how did you find us, kind of thing, you know what I mean? We also change our passwords often. Myself and my coworker and our director, we all run the account together, so everyone knows what's happening. We delete our conversations if for any reason it ever got like broken into. It's kind of sensitive, but any sensitive matters, we'll encourage a meeting or a counseling in person, so that way it's more safe than just online. So it has definitely worked in our favor, but there's no one or no program is perfect. But for the most part, we definitely try to use those things because it's worked for us.
Is anybody else working in more of the one-on-one mentorship space that you found really helpful to kind of maintain that individual relationship, while also, I know, Steph, I feel like what you had suggested around that domain that you use, that's a work domain, is kind of one way that maybe you all have navigated that too, which takes it out of social media. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because there's always that mix of that balance, because a lot of our youth are also peers. So I think we are still very much navigating that. I think we're trying our best in a way to, like, even if we are using work domains, it's still their personal social, it's still their social media, so it's kind of melded, but we've been using that mostly more for group programs, and then with like group Instagrams or group Facebooks, those have just always kind of used that system. But yeah, it's actually a very interesting conversation, because I think we're facing a similar question.
Yeah, I'm just to touch on that. I think there are definitely like maybe some boundaries that we break with our youth, given the peer-to-peer contact and given that we are that close to our youth. And so I wonder also if like other organizations are navigating like wanting this like informal peer-to-peer relationship, and also kind of setting boundaries that way.
I guess one thing we did do is I guess define what is considered informal kind of peer relationships and what is defined as organizational. I guess defining those spaces of like, hey, you know, when I'm talking to you like this, FYI, I'm not representing the organization, or this is just us kind of chatting, that sort of thing, like when the youth engage with each other. Yeah, it's very interesting. I love to hear what you come up with as strategies, because I think we're navigating that also.
For sure, you too.
And I like kind of where you left that idea, Steph, because I do think it's really important to be really clear and specific and not leave that kind of vagueness of ill-defined, this is like work Mallory, this is non-work Mallory, you're talking to me about this. You know, I think it's really important to clarify that up front and make sure consent is very explicit before entering into those kind of relationships, and that might help really frame up where, you know, there's still always blurriness and gray areas, and those are the challenges of the sector of work that we've chosen. And, you know, it's people-centered and we live and breathe in the gray a lot, but it's helpful to be really explicit and clear when we can. And I know some folks, I was talking to somebody who works at Pathways to Education, who does a lot of mentorship, And I know they were trying to do a lot of maintaining social distancing in-person check-ins, which is like very complicated in its own way. They work in Hamilton region, and they were doing like home front lawn check-ins because a lot of youth they were serving didn't have devices or internet access per se. So it enabled some of that, but I think then their lives were much more complicated trying to get around and considering safety in the other way. So I don't know if I've heard of a lot of other mentorship programs with the same challenge as you, but I'll be curious.
So it looks like we have QSLA. You guys are on deck. You wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a suggestion. I think what we try to do, especially when the outbreak happened, we were trying to do a shotgun approach to try to capture so many people at the same time. And we realized that wasn't working. We would have 10, 12 people the first week, and then we would have, you know, as time went down, we managed to go down to 5. And then we said, you know what, let's take a more one-on-one approach. And then we found that our group built again because we were putting a little bit more emphasis, not on trying to capture and tell everyone at the same time what to do, because not a lot of people were taking in the information the same as others. So I found that we focused on a few. They would then, you know, relay the message to certain individuals that would, you know, find value from our program. And then we started building our program in terms of numbers again. So we do use Instagram, and we also use Instagram to take in, because we also want feedback from the students. So if we're going to be doing these online classes or Zoom classes, we're looking for feedback, so they would fill out some homework questions, take a photo, send it on Instagram. So there's some type of you know, communication back and forth. And we've seen our numbers in the last few weeks grow back up again. So I mean, I'm not sure how that works for most people, but I just would suggest don't try to put out there that, okay, we got something going on and you're hoping to get 50 to 100 students or whatever, you know, massive number, because sometimes it's not that effective. It's like, you know, work small and then build.
I like that. That's a really helpful tip. I'm sure also while we're all getting pressure to like serve as many kids as possible, everybody needs everything these days, to be gentle with ourselves around trying to do it in a really like thoughtful approach. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a great insight.
It looks like we have a comment or question from Michaela. So what are some of the best ways to engage parents in situations that may be less traditional, from non-sort of nuclear families? With our summer programming, we plan to keep a 1-to-4 or 1-to-5 coach participant ratio with the intention of building those relationships, but we really need the parents' engagement to ensure high completion rates of our 4-week program.
And sorry, I was trying to add more, but accidentally sent the question. At the beginning of this whole situation, we did call each of our participants and families individually. We have about 450 calls that were made to try and get those pictures of the individual situations, especially with the youth that we work with. There's a wide spectrum of personal situations. And with how we're building our summer curriculum, like I said, a small coach to participant ratio. And before every session, we want our coaches to be calling those kids to make sure they can set up their space and to make sure they're prepared for the call that'll be in a half hour, 45 minutes. So a little bit nervous about the phone call situation and families that might not have those traditional situations or a guardian always present, but also ways to engage those parents. I find that with their buy-in, we'll be able to have more buy-in from the kids and accountability from the kids and excitement around the programming that way.
And I'm sure you have many examples. I think the biggest point of feedback we've actually had in the play program since COVID happened is that parent and family engagement has had a major increase from in-person programming, because it's basically brought it into the home. And amongst, like, same with you, a variety of family situations, kind of everybody's scenario is different. you know, many family members living under one roof and saving or sharing devices and things like that. So, I mean, on a programmatic perspective, I think some of the biggest wins that youth workers have had is to be really intentional around how the curriculum in the program integrates some of their engagement, or like gives challenges for the kids to do something with their parents and come back next week or things like that. Or like whoever else is in the household, there's been, I think, a really positive uptick. And we're now trying to think if and when COVID ends, how do we maintain that kind of success in keeping parent garden family engagement when we come back to it. But I don't know if other folks have had any experiences around garden and family engagement and concerns around that, because I do think you're right that it can be really helpful to have, especially depending on the age of the participants, somebody, if they're there during setup, to make sure it happens, or things like that. I don't know if other folks have any other insights that they've experienced.
So Jake's House says that we organize group mentoring sessions through Minecraft programs, for those young folks who know what that is. And we're planning to start it virtually again for individuals who are on the autism spectrum. Any advice? Shall we keep family involved? The age group is 6 to 18.
I'm not going to feign to be an expert in programming, particularly serving participants that are on the autism spectrum disorder. So I don't want to jump in and give any false advice in that area, but I don't know if other folks on the call have any insights or experiences that they might be able to share for that.
Alex from Awesome Ottawa is saying you definitely need family involvement.
Sorry, I'll just chime in for a second. So because we run sports programs and we're doing them virtually through Zoom, we need family buy-in. So I think especially for kids, youth, and children who are on the spectrum, they need that one-on-one support from family, for the social stuff, and just to follow along with instructions. Not that I'm saying some of the kids are going to be super capable of it, but it's really good to set them up for success right away and say it's good to have your mom and dad or guardian or someone involved to help them get through the first couple of activities. And then if you kind of see like, oh, okay, they can manage this, then step away and they can be independent and participate and follow along. But it's just really important. And we really set it up for success ahead of time. Like I send out lesson plans 2 days before for our programs from our coaches. I make sure that they provide it to me so I can send it out to the kids that will be participating and saying like, here's all the equipment you need. Here's the activities that we're going to be going through. They might switch so they don't get fixated on having to be stuck on that one activity. But I really think you need that buy-in. Otherwise, you won't know what they're working on in the Minecraft. I don't know how it works, so I don't know how you can facilitate that. But if they're able to kind of do whatever they want on their own computer, then you might lose the engagement from the youth who's participating.
That's really good advice. Alex, while you're unmuted, do you want to jump into the question that you had around volunteers?
Yeah, so for our programs, our in-person programs are very much volunteer supported and we depend on them greatly. We also have program staff that are there. So now that we've switched over to the virtual world, we don't have as many volunteers. Well, we don't have any volunteers participating. It's us running Zoom registration, they join, and we have our staff online to record and facilitate from afar with parents. But I have volunteers who want to re-engage and they want to participate. So I'm kind of curious from all of your minds who do work with volunteers and have that, would it be worth it for us to kind of set up a mentorship? But then I don't have control. Like, how do I create that control? And then I also have like leaders in our organization who want to let volunteers call members in our programs just to touch base. We did that originally when we started. When we went into lockdown kind of thing, our program staff called, which made sense to us. They know our members, they know our participants, and they were talking to families, the parents. And now our leadership team is saying, hey, instead of us using our resources, we're very small, let's see if volunteers can do that. But what are the risks that I'm creating by allowing volunteers to do that? So I would like some input if anyone has any suggestions.
The thing that I was thinking about that might be helpful, I mean, volunteers, I don't know if you get a strong background of information about them, but it might be really helpful to make sure that the clear standards of practice or expectations of practice are made clear. And I even think about maybe there's like group phone calls or something you set up so that you're not doing so much individual with a family. Maybe there's like a hotline call in that you set for 2 hours a day that people can call into that is manned by, you know, a few volunteers or something. I mean, we have I would say fairly like strict volunteer standards because we do kind of set the same standards of expectation around safeguarding on volunteers as we do staff. But those might be some ways to help, even just with resourcing. I hear you on like thinking about capacity and resourcing. You have to be really creative to manage some of those scenarios. I don't know if other folks have insights around how they've tapped into any volunteer resources and managed some of that.
I just got a message that Alona Crawford might have some insight on this. Did you want to jump in?
Hey, not insight on this specifically, just something when it came to traditional, like traditional versus like the untraditional kind of issue, that concept. It's not versus, it's just like, as you guys stated before beginning of the whole conversation, it is a changing world. And honestly, yeah, the world is changing very fast. And when it comes to being traditional, right, we have a lot of parents that aren't like both in the picture, or it can be a guardian where it's the grandmother, and let's just say the grandmother doesn't speak English and all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to communication like that with the participant and trying to talk to the parent, it kind of becomes a blur with that. So where I'm trying to like, I don't know if it's a statement I'm trying to get at or what I'm exactly kind of convey here, but basically there's a lot of, and I can speak this off of my experience too, there's a lot of individuals or participants that start young taking on responsibility, and that means for their life and their action. So I grew up wanting to play sports my whole life, and my mom's not the type of like, she wasn't born here, she was born from Jamaica, so I had to invest in that myself. I had to put myself into program opportunities on stuff. So it was me making that kind of communication. So now I'm seeing that on a different generation, that they're making that kind of initiative to make engagement with activities, because it's not always going to be a parent pushing them to do that. So when it comes to being engaging with the participants and having that kind of that relationship still, how does that impact, or like, I don't know, would that contribute, would that be beneficial? Does that reflect off of everything you're saying when it comes to virtual? Like, how does that go?
Yeah, I think that's like a really important point. As you said, the world is changing, and I think it's about finding, and jump in, Mallory, if you disagree, but I think it's about finding policies and procedures that work for your organization and that you're comfortable with. I think, you know, you guys are experts in your own reality, and you know the kids and the youth that you work with. So if that makes sense for you, and those, you know, that's the population that you're working with, then you know, you got to make those choices for yourself.
Yeah, the safeguarding practices are not a one size fits all. Your human capacity, your resource capacity, your participants' scenarios and situations should inform your practices. There are, like, of course, some baseline standards that are really important to understand and act towards, but in these kinds of scenarios, I totally echo that. Like, you've got to kind of work through the mud to figure out what works with you. And that's why, you know, Emily said at the beginning, we do really experiential training every year, because we come up against 50, 100 plus scenarios every year that are, you know, you kind of work through and make ethical decisions and weigh pros and cons and try your best to come up with a solution that seems appropriate, helpful, continues to build those kinds of relationships you want while acting with safety in mind. So yeah, I hear you. it's been a new year of thinking for us in this landscape. We haven't had to consider so many virtual considerations, and as people who are not tech experts, we're constantly trying things and figuring it out as well, because we're about in-person programming. And so even for us to feel comfortable in this new landscape while also dealing with everything else, it's a lot that we're all transitioning through. So I feel that, Alana.
Okay, thank you.
So we're not to cut off the conversation abruptly, but I want to respect folks' time. So we're at the end of our allotted time, but if you need or want and still have questions, we're free to hang around to answer those questions. But if you have to jump off, we certainly understand. As a note, we're going to be moving our community learning series to monthly sessions, just because it's summer and no one wants to be on a computer more than they have to. So you'll get an email in the next couple of days kind of outlining what the next session is going to be about, along with the slides from today, and the recorded video will be posted to our website. So feel free to check those out. We will also send out the link to our collaborative Slack channel that you can join, and I'll create a tab around child safeguarding for those conversations to continue in that space. So again, thank you everybody for making the time. Please stick around if you continue to have questions or you want to continue to discuss, but otherwise, thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, the biggest thanks to everybody. I learned a lot, even hearing your reflections and questions. And in the PowerPoint, the Right to Play Child Safeguarding Policy is there. So if anybody also wants to look at a big document as you leave here, that is accessible online for you. Thanks for holding this space with us.